Hi, I'm Lisa Bear-Culp. I'm going to show you today how to do a technique where we use dipping glazes, Mako Stoneware dry glazes, in combination with designer liner and stroke and coat. So, the dipping glaze I'm going to use is Mako's SD Copper Float. SD glazes indicate the Stoneware dry formulas. So this was dipped in Copper Float Stoneware Glaze and fired to cone 6. The way I started them, this is on a red stoneware body. I drew the picture on, there's the picture, with designer liner, let it dry, filled in some of the color spaces with Mako Stroke and Coat. I used Cutie Pie Coral for this part, and then Glowworm for this part. This is what it looks like after. So, we're coming into Just Watch Me Wax now. I am going to use some of Mako's Wax Resist. I'm gonna squeeze some into a little cup. Okay? I've got my little mug on a banding wheel. I'm going to use a script liner number 6 brush for this. I love this brush for waxing because it's got long hair and it really holds a lot of material. Kind of get it centered on this banding wheel, and I can just touch the tip of the brush to the foot. Now, when I made this little mug, I knew I was going to dip it. So the whole time I'm working, I kind of have how I'm going to glaze them in mind. So for this guy, knowing I was going to dip it, I left myself a little foot, and I'm going to wax the foot so that the wax resist is up the side a little bit. I just kind of like that when I use a dipping technique. The glazes are very stable and tend to not run, but it's just sort of a traditional dry footing technique to have a little bit of clay at the bottom showing. Okay, so that's what it's going to look like at the end. I also, bring this guy back, I also had waxed over my painting, so I'm going to show you that right now. So the bottom is waxed, then I'm going to use the wax resist to paint over these little designs that I made. I'm going to do that whole thing. I'm being real careful because once you get wax resist someplace, you can't remove it easily. So make sure when you paint on your wax, you do it with a good bit of care. I'm painting over the Glowworm and over the Cutie Pie Coral. Those two colors, I think, I don't know, but I kind of think that those two colors look fabulous with this glaze. So after this dries, we are going to dip it in our copper float. So we'll see ya over there. Okay, so our wax resist that we applied over the stroke and coat and designer liner is completely dry. The wax resist is dry on the bottom. When you are using a dipping technique, you have to use wax on the bottom in order to do dry footing or not have glaze on the bottom, okay? So I am jumping over to this bucket now, and I am going to dip this. This glaze is called Copper Float, and it's this. It's beautiful. Whoops. So even though I've already stirred this glaze, I'm going to go ahead and re-stir my dry stoneware glaze. I'm really thorough in my stirring, and as soon as you're done stirring, that's when you want to dip. I'm going to use tongs, although sometimes I grab them by the handle and do them over. Grabbing it with tongs, and I am going to dip it all the way in. When you pull it out of the glaze, I usually hold it with the tongs, give it a little shake, try to get all the drips off. And then I put it down. I'll put it that way so you can see it. And the first dip dries really quickly.
Subsequent dips, I dip these twice with using the directions I gave you with that thickness of glaze. I do 2 dips total. So the first dip dries really quickly. You can see it's sort of wet over here, but it's already starting to dry enough to touch at the lip and on the inside, which is a good thing because my hand is in there. Anyway, that first dip will dry somewhat quickly. The second dip takes a little bit longer because the porous bisqueware will start to take on water and start to get a little bit saturated with water. So your second dip will take a little bit more time to dry. Make sure that this piece dries completely in between dips. If it's a little bit wet still and you dip it again, the glaze that you applied the first time in your first dip is just gonna come off in the liquid. So I really do a thorough job of drying these. And then at the end, well, I'll show you. I'm just gonna grab this with my hand and dip just the top part for a second time so you can see a little contrast. See the contrast where it's dry and you can tell where it's wet up here. If I were to grab this wet part now, it would stick to my fingers and I would remove that glaze accidentally, which is a little bit difficult to fix. It can be fixed. You can kind of get some glaze on your finger and tap it on those bad spots that you made by grabbing it. But if you do that, you probably won't get this like really nice kind of perfect surface. This is what I love about dipping glazes, is this thorough, complete surface that you get when you dip. It's just a really beautiful effect. And if you've got a piece with a lot of tactile texture on it, this is a way to get glaze into all of the low spots. It's just a really great old technique. And P.S. After you dip, the glaze is going to kind of bead up on the waxed areas. See this? So I'll take my tiny sponge and I just carefully wipe it off of those places. Also, the wax will bead slightly, or the glaze will bead slightly on the wax resist on the bottom. Take your sponge and wipe those beads away. Oh yeah, I signed this with designer liner, by the way. So when I fire that, it's not gonna stick. This black initials that I have on there, that will not stick to the kiln shelf. So what you end up with on the bottom of your pieces is designer liner and then exposed clay. Up the side a little bit is where your glaze begins, and that all came from doing a great job waxing. The neater this line, the better you're gonna like it after the firing, I promise. I tell my students to be real careful there. So, this guy will look just like this guy.